this while we have been talking about how printing techniques made their way to Europe from China. We have also learned in great detail how the print revolution in Europe was a major breakthrough moment in the history of humankind because it spread literacy among the masses, because the masses were now able to read new books and enlighten themselves. But what we have been talking about pertains to the context of Europe. Let us now travel out of Europe to the Indian subcontinent and learn how printing presses came into being in this place. We will also learn about how different kinds of things were printed in India for the first time. So let us now begin this discussion on India and the world of print. Now, much before this printing technology had made its way to India, manuscripts were used for the purpose of writing. And these manuscripts were handwritten. That is to say, people used to write on these manuscripts. Now, these ancient Indian manuscripts bear the rich history and legacy of the past. And these were written in various languages like Sanskrit, Arabic, Persian. These were also written in various vernacular languages. Now, what kind of things were these manuscripts written on? Well, these manuscripts were written on palm leaves or handmade paper. So, can you understand how laborious the production of these manuscripts was? Because palm leaves were used in order to copy down the manuscripts, and at the same time different kinds of handmade paper which were made from animal skins were also used for the purpose of writing these manuscripts. So these speak to the fact that India has a very rich tradition of handwritten manuscripts. Now, how do you think were these manuscripts preserved? Because these are written on paper and these are loose in nature. And for the purpose of preservation of the manuscripts, these were often sewn together or pressed between wooden covers. So this image shows you how many manuscripts were sewn together. So these were the separate leaves on which the manuscripts were written, and then those were sewn together in order to keep the manuscript from falling apart. And at the same time, for this purpose of preservation, many manuscripts were pressed between hard wood covers. So these were the ways in which ancient Indian manuscripts were preserved. But do you think this kind of a preservation will help the manuscripts survive for long? Most definitely not. Firstly, the production of manuscripts is quite expensive, because different kinds of palm leaves had to be gathered in order to write the manuscripts. The scribes who used to write the manuscripts had to put a lot of labor and effort in order to write these manuscripts. So the production of these manuscripts was expensive as well as quite laborious. And at the same time, these manuscripts are also very fragile, because these are just some loose leaves. How long can these loose leaves stay together? So it is for this reason that the production of manuscripts became limited over time, because people now realized that these manuscripts cannot be kept together for long. Though manuscripts were still being produced till the 19th century alongside the production of printed materials, over time the usage of manuscripts in everyday life started decreasing. In pre-colonial Bengal, that is the time when the Britishers had not come to the Indian subcontinent, a wide network of primary schools was present. Now, who attended these primary schools? It were the children of the Indian subcontinent. Now, in these primary schools, a different kind of learning process used to happen. What was that? In these primary schools, the children were taught only to write. Doesn't this sound quite strange to you? Because since the time you and I have been to primary schools, we have been taught to read and write. Without knowing how to read, the process of learning remains incomplete. But in pre-colonial Bengal, the students only learned how to write. So how did they write? The teachers used to dictate things from their memory and the students learned only to write. So the students never learned how to read their books. This was what used to happen in the primary schools in pre-colonial Bengal. Now let us talk about how printing press first made its way to the Indian subcontinent. In the mid-16th century, the first printing press came to Goa with the Portuguese missionaries. Now try to understand this in the context of the historical time. Now during the 16th and the 17th centuries, many European powers were coming to trade with India. And in the process of this, they later on established their colonies. So in the mid-16th century, when the Portuguese missionaries had come to India, they had set up the first printing press in Goa. This is how the first printing press in Goa looked. And by the year 1674, books now began to be printed in Konkan and Kannada languages. Now Konkan and Kannada are languages which are spoken by the people of the South Indian states. So we can understand that the printing press first established itself in the southern parts of the Indian subcontinent. Now over time, many groups of missionaries were coming to India from Europe. Catholic priests printed the first Tamil book in the year 1579 at Cochin, and they also printed the first Malayalam book in the year 1713. Now the first Malayalam book was printed in both Tamil and Malayalam. Tamil and Malayalam being Dravidian languages which are spoken by the people who live in the southern parts of the country. So we can understand how the southern parts of Indian subcontinent were now beginning to become sites of printing presses. So these were the places where printing presses were now coming into being, and these were the places where many kinds of printed materials were now being printed. By the year 1710, Dutch Protestant missionaries had printed around 32 Tamil texts. Now let me tell you something very important in this regard. When the European powers were coming as trading companies in India, they were trying to establish their own power and authority over the lands of the subcontinent as well as over the people living in the subcontinent. And they were all rival powers. They were wanting to outdo the others. And in order to outdo the others, they had to spread their influence over people. So all these people were trying to spread their living habits, their lifestyles and their techniques among the people. And so the Dutch Protestant missionaries were also trying to set up their own printing presses here in India so that their printing techniques now became famous among the people of the subcontinent. While they were trying to reach out to the masses and spread their influence, they were wanting to outdo the rival European companies. So from this we can understand that printing press came to India holding hands with the Christian missionaries. Now though these Christian missionaries were of different groups, be that the Protestants or the Catholics, their religion was Christianity. And all they wanted to do was spread their religion, that is Christianity, among the masses of the Indian subcontinent. Now English printing began quite late in the Indian subcontinent, and it happened with the Irishman called James Augustus Hickey. In the year 1780, Hickey began to edit the Bengal Gazette. And this Bengal Gazette was the first English language newspaper to be printed in India. So with Hickey's Bengal Gazette that was being printed from 1780, English newspaper was now beginning to be printed in the country. Now Hickey's Bengal Gazette, as it proclaimed, was free from the colonial rule. So this was a private enterprise, and Hickey took great pride in his independence from the colonial apparatus. He said that his paper is not controlled by anyone. His paper is for the masses, but it is not under the influence of anyone. Now before proceeding with this lesson, let me ask you a question. Which was the first English language newspaper to be printed in India? Was it the Tribune or Hickey's Bengal Gazette or the Oriental Magazine of Calcutta or the Bengal Journal? Well, the correct answer is Hickey's Bengal Gazette. First printed in the year 1780, Hickey's Bengal Gazette is the first English language newspaper to be printed in India. Now Hickey's Bengal Gazette was a private enterprise, as we just mentioned, so it was not really sanctioned by the colonial rule. Now iconoclastic as Hickey was, he presented different kinds of things through his newspaper. Firstly, this newspaper was very provocative and sarcastic in its tone. That is to say, it severely criticized the government's politics. This newspaper was also anti-war and anti-colonial in nature. What do we understand by that? By anti-colonial, we mean that Hickey was against the process of colonization, which is why Hickey printed different kinds of materials and information pertaining to the oppressive slave trade. So in this way, he made his newspaper free from the influence of the colonial rule, and at the same time he left no stones unturned in criticizing or scorning the colonial rule. Now, do you think the colonial officials were very happy with this? Most definitely not, because Hickey was printing different kinds of things in Bengal Gazette, which was actually exposing the process of imperialism and colonization. And for this reason, Hickey's Bengal Gazette now invited strong disapproval from the company officials. So the company officials were not at all favoring his sarcastic and anti-colonial nature, which is why Hickey's Bengal Gazette was now being met with severe disapproval from the colonial apparatus. Now at the same time, Hickey also published gossips about senior company officials. This now severely enraged the company officials. What did this do? On account of this, the then Governor General of British India, Warren Hastings, now persecuted Hickey. So Hickey's Bengal Gazette, that was anti-colonial in nature, that was sarcastic and provocative in its tone, was now no longer in publication when the Governor General Warren Hastings persecuted James Augustus Hickey. Now what did the colonial officials do as a response to this? They were now very intent on maintaining the image of the British Empire, and they did not want the British Empire to falter and lose its image before the Indian masses. Now to this end, the colonial government in India encouraged the publication of those newspapers that they sanctioned. So they wanted the Indian masses to know only what they sanctioned, only what they wanted the masses to see and learn, which is why a new newspaper called the India Gazette was being published from the year 1870. Now the India Gazette was intended to nullify all the wrongs that Hickey's Bengal Gazette had done to the image of the British Empire before the Indian masses. So in this way, this India Gazette came into being, and this was the second English newspaper to be published in the Indian subcontinent. Now during this time, many Indians were also publishing Indian newspapers, because the newspapers that were sanctioned by the British colonial government published only what they wanted the masses to know. That is to say, those newspapers published only one side of the coin. Those newspapers did not let the masses see the entire picture, which is why the Indians were also beginning to publish their own newspapers. Now, which do you think was the first Indian newspaper to be published in the subcontinent? Well, the first to appear was the weekly Bengal Gazette. Now, this newspaper was brought out by the Indian editor called Gangadhar Bhattacharya. Now, Gangadhar Bhattacharya was in close association with the social reformer Raja Ram Mohan Roy. So, from this we can understand how these Indian newspapers were now voicing the opinion of the masses, voicing how the masses felt under the colonial rule. And these newspapers were free from the influence of the colonizers, because these newspapers were published as independent and autonomous units. So, in this lesson we have talked at great length how printing press made its way to India. Firstly, we learnt about how manuscripts were produced when the printing technology was not introduced in the country. But with the various Christian missionaries making their way to the Indian subcontinent through the 16th, 17th and 18th centuries, many new printing presses were now being set up in the country. And we have also learnt about the first English newspaper, which was Hickey's Bengal Gazette. We also learnt how it was anti-colonial in nature, which is why it was met with severe disapproval and scorn from the company officials. Subsequently, we also learnt about how the Indians were also bringing out their own Indian newspapers. In a subsequent lesson, we will be taking this discussion forward by talking about how this print culture had changed and altered the entire culture and society of India. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app to learn one-to-one with our amazing teachers, or to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. Learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it's rewarding too. So register for free now.